My cousin Tyler and I used to have sleepovers all the time when we were kids, always at his house though, because he had the cool house back then before cell phones and modern video games. Kids actually used to do normal kid things, like for example we both loved to play hide and seek at night. One time when we were 9, both our parents were going out for a night in Atlantic City, so they had my other cousin Tyler's older brother Joe keep watch on us. An hour into the night however, Joe told both of us he was going out and not to tell his parents. He made us swear on our lives we wouldn't snitch. He said he'd be back by midnight, tossed us a bag of Jolly Ranchers as a bribe, and slipped out the back door. The moment the lock clicked shut, the atmosphere in that house shifted. Tyler's house was one of those sprawling, 3-story Victorians that people in our town admired from the street but hated to be inside of. It had high ceilings, drafty corridors, and floorboards that groaned like dying animals whenever you stepped on them. During the day, it was an adventure. But at night, with just 2 9-year-olds alone in a 4,000 square foot structure, it felt like being inside the belly of a whale. We spent the first hour doing what unsupervised kids do, eating too much sugar and watching cable TV we weren't allowed to watch. But around 9:30 p.m., the boredom set in. "Let's play manhunt," Tyler suggested, his mouth blue from a raspberry candy. "Lights off. Whole house." I hesitated. "Just us two?" "It's kind of scary with the lights off, Ty." "Don't be a baby," he scoffed, grabbing a heavy mag-light flashlight from the kitchen drawer. "I'll seek first. You have 60 seconds to hide. If I catch you, I get to punch you in the arm. Hard." I didn't want to be the chicken, so I agreed. Tyler stood by the microwave, covering his eyes, and began to count loudly. 1, 2, 3. I took off running. My socks slipped on the hardwood as I scrambled out of the kitchen and into the main foyer. The house was pitch black aside from the streetlights filtering through the sheer curtains, casting long, skeletal shadows across the furniture. I needed a spot that was impossible to find. Under the couch was too obvious. Behind the curtains was risky. 20. 21. I sprinted up the main staircase, skipping every other step. The second floor was where the bedrooms were, but the third floor, the attic converted into a guest suite, was where we rarely went. It was always colder up there, and it smelled of cedar and mothballs. It was perfect. I reached the third floor landing just as I heard Tyler yell, 50, from the kitchen. I panicked. I dove into the guest room and scanned for a spot. There was an old armoire, a heavy oak bed, and a small door that led to the crawlspace storage. I chose the bed. I shimmied on my stomach, squeezing myself between the dusty floor and the box spring. The dust bunnies tickled my nose, and I had to pinch my nostrils to keep from sneezing. Silence settled over the house. For a long time, the only sound was the thumping of my own heart against the floorboards. I lay there, waiting for the creak of the stairs, waiting for the beam of the mag light to sweep the room. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I started to feel smug. I had outsmarted him. He was probably checking the basement or the garage. I shifted my weight, trying to get comfortable, when I finally heard it. Creak. It came from the stairs leading up to the third floor. I held my breath. Tyler was trying to be stealthy. Usually, he stomped around like an elephant, but this was slow. Deliberate. Creak. Pause. Creak. He was taking one step every 10 seconds. He was really getting into the role of the hunter. I pressed my face into the carpet, grinning in the dark. Come on, Tyler, I thought. Come and find me. The footsteps reached the landing outside the room. I could see the sliver of space beneath the door frame. A shadow blocked the faint light from the hallway. The door handle slowly turned. It didn't rattle, it just rotated with a smooth, oiled silence. The door pushed open. I waited for the flashlight beam. I waited for Tyler to shout, "Gotcha." But there was no light. The figure stepped into the room. From my vantage point under the bed, all I could see were feet. My smile faded instantly. Tyler was wearing white Nike socks. He had taken his shoes off at the door because his mom had a strict "no shoes in the house" rule. The feet standing 2 yards away from my face were wearing heavy, muddy work boots. Dark leather. Caked with wet earth. My brain stalled. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Joe came back. Maybe Joe is trying to scare us. But Joe wore pristine basketball sneakers. He was obsessed with them. He wouldn't be caught dead in boots like that. And Joe would have yelled out, "Boys, I'm home." The boots didn't move. The person was just standing there, right in the center of the room, completely still. No flashlight. No voice. Then, I heard the breathing. It wasn't the panting of a kid who had been running up the stairs. It was a wet, congested rasp. It sounded like air being pulled through a straw stuck in thick mud. Hoo. Hoo. A cold wash of adrenaline flooded my veins. It started in my chest and shot down to my toes, freezing me in place. I realized with terrifying clarity that this wasn't Tyler. This wasn't Joe. Someone was in the house. I wanted to scream, but my throat had seized up. I just stared at those muddy boots, praying they wouldn't turn toward the bed. Suddenly, from 3 floors down, from the kitchen, I heard a voice. "Matthew? Come out. I give up. You win." It was Tyler. He was downstairs. He had never even come upstairs. The person standing in the room with me shifted their weight. The leather of the boots creaked. They had heard Tyler, too. Slowly, terrifyingly, the boots turned. They weren't facing the door anymore. They were facing the bed. The heavy, wet breathing stopped. And then, the person slowly dropped to their knees. I squeezed my eyes shut, my entire body rigid, bracing for the inevitable grab. I expected a rough hand to clamp over my ankle or face. But the grab didn't come. Instead, the bed frame above me groaned. The mattress depressed inches from my head. The man wasn't looking under the bed. He was climbing onto it. I opened my eyes. Through the narrow gap between the bed frame and the floor, I saw the heels of the muddy boots lift as the man hoisted his weight up onto the mattress. The spring squeaked violently, masking the sound of my own shallow, terrified gasps. He settled into the center of the bed, lying flat on his back, directly above me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow: he is hiding too. He thought the room was empty. He had heard Tyler yelling from downstairs and assumed the coast was clear to find a spot to wait. He was lying in wait, in the dark, on the very bed where I was supposed to be sleeping later that night. The breathing resumed, heavier now, vibrating through the mattress coils. Hoo. Hoo. It was rhythmic, almost like he was trying to calm himself down, or maybe he was excited. I knew I had seconds. Tyler was downstairs, but he was impatient. Any moment now, he would come stomping up those stairs to find me, and he would walk right into this room, flip on the light, and see the man lying on the bed. I had to move. I waited for the man to shift his weight again. The moment the mattress creaked, masking the sound, I slid my body sideways, inch by inch, out from the side of the bed closest to the door. I moved like a liquid, fueled by a primal instinct I didn't know I possessed. My shoulder brushed the carpet, my fingers gripping the fibers to pull myself along. I cleared the edge of the bed. I was exposed now. If he sat up, if he just turned his head to the left, he would see me crouching on the floor. I didn't look back. I crawled on my hands and knees toward the doorway, keeping my movements synchronized with the man's heavy exhalations. Just as I reached the threshold of the room, I heard it. The heavy thud of footsteps on the stairs. "Matthew? Stop being a jerk, come out." Tyler's voice echoed from the second-floor landing. He was coming up to the third floor. Panic, hot and sharp, pierced my chest. If Tyler yelled my name again, the man on the bed would know I was here. Or worse, the man would prepare to ambush Tyler. I stood up. My knees were shaking so badly I almost collapsed. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I launched myself from the room and sprinted to the top of the stairs. Tyler was halfway up, the flashlight beam bouncing around the walls. "There you are." Tyler grinned, aiming the light at my face. I didn't stop. I slammed into him, grabbing his sweatshirt with both hands. "Run!" I hissed, the word tearing out of my throat. "Run, Tyler, run!" Tyler looked confused for a split second, but the terror in my eyes must have been contagious. He didn't argue. He turned and we scrambled down the stairs, tripping over our own feet. "What is it?" he shouted as we hit the second floor. "There's a man!" I screamed. "In the guest room. He's on the bed." We didn't stop at the second floor. We practically tumbled down the main staircase to the foyer. I fumbled with the deadbolt on the front door, my fingers slippery with sweat, while Tyler looked back up the dark abyss of the staircase. From the third floor, a heavy, booming crash echoed down. The sound of boots hitting the floor. Then, the distinct, rapid thumping of someone sprinting toward the stairs. The lock clicked. I threw the door open, and we burst out into the cool night air. We didn't stop at the lawn. We ran straight to the neighbor's house across the street, Mrs. Gable, a retired nurse who always kept her porch light on. We pounded on her door until our knuckles were bruised, screaming for help. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, they entered Tyler's house with guns drawn. We sat on Mrs. Gable's couch, wrapped in blankets, watching the red and blue lights flicker against the Victorian siding of Tyler's house. They brought the man out in handcuffs. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a regular guy, maybe in his 30s, disheveled and dirty, wearing those same mud-caked boots. He wasn't fighting the cops, he was just limp, staring at the ground. Later, we found out who he was. He was a drifter who had been fired from a construction site a few towns over. But that wasn't the part that haunts me. When the police searched the house, they found his nest. He hadn't broken in that night. In the crawlspace behind the guest room closet, the room where I had been hiding, they found food wrappers, water bottles, and a sleeping bag. They found a peephole drilled through the drywall that looked directly into the bedroom. Based on the trash, the police estimated he had been living in the walls for at least 2 weeks. He had been there while we played video games. He had been there while we slept. But the detail that keeps me awake at night, the one thing I wish I could forget, is what they found in his pockets. He had a roll of duct tape, a jagged hunting knife, and a handwritten list. The list didn't have names. It just had times. 8 a.m., parents leave. 4:00 p.m., kids home. 10:00 p.m., lights out. He wasn't just hiding. He was waiting for a schedule. And that night, when Joe left us alone, we had inadvertently moved the schedule up. I haven't played hide-and-seek since. And I never stepped foot in that house again. This happened when I was 16, living in a rural part of Oregon where the backyard isn't a fenced-in square of grass, but acres of dense pine forest that eventually merges with state land. It's beautiful during the day, but at night, the darkness out there is heavy. It feels solid, like it's pressing against the windows. It was late October. My best friend, Mark, had come over for the weekend. We were at that age where we thought we were too tough to be scared of anything, so we decided it would be a great idea to camp out in the clearing about 200 yards behind my house. We pitched my dad's old 4-person canvas tent. It was one of those heavy-duty beige ones that smelled like mildew and campfire smoke. We set up a fire pit, roasted hot dogs, and spent hours talking about girls and school, listening to the crackle of the wood and the wind moving through the towering pines. By 1 a.m., the fire had died down to glowing embers. The temperature dropped fast, so we retreated into the tent and zipped the heavy flap shut. Now, anyone who has camped in a tent knows that the acoustics are weird. The canvas acts like a drum skin, it amplifies sounds from the outside while muffling your own view. You are effectively blind, but you can hear everything. We were lying in our sleeping bags, just starting to drift off, when I heard it. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, breaking dry twigs and crushing dead leaves. And they were close. I froze, my eyes snapping open in the pitch black. I heard Mark shift in his sleeping bag next to me. "You hear that?" Mark whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Yeah," I breathed back. "Probably just a deer." "Deer don't walk like that," Mark said. "That's 2 legs. It's heavy." We lay in silence, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent, near where our heads were positioned. My mind immediately went to my older brother, David. He was 20, home from college, and he lived for pranking us. He had probably seen our flashlights from the house and snuck out to scare the living daylights out of us. "David, knock it off," I called out, trying to sound annoyed rather than terrified. "We know it's you. Go away." Silence. Then, a sound that made my skin crawl. It was a fingernail, slowly scratching down the side of the heavy canvas. Zzzzzzzzp. It started high and dragged all the way down to the ground, inches from my ear. "Cut it out, David," I yelled, sitting up. "It's not funny." The scratching stopped. Then, a low, guttural giggle floated through the fabric. It didn't sound like David. It sounded wet. Distorted. Like someone with too much saliva in their mouth. "Ha, ha, ha." Mark scrambled backward, hitting the other side of the tent. "Dude, that is not your brother." "Who is it?" I shouted, my bravado fading into genuine fear. "I have a knife." I didn't have a knife. I had a bag of marshmallows and a flashlight. The voice on the other side spoke. It was a whisper, but it was clear, right against the mesh window at the top of the tent. "Can I come in? It's cold." It wasn't a question. It was a demand disguised as a plea. "No." Mark yelled. "Get out of here. We're calling the cops." There was a long pause. The woods went silent again. No crickets. No wind. Just the heavy breathing of 2 terrified teenagers inside a fragile bubble of fabric. Then, the footsteps started again. But they weren't walking away. They were circling. Crunch. 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 Around and around the tent. Slowly. Methodically. It was like a predator inspecting a trap. Every time he passed the entrance, he would drag his hand across the zipper. Thwip. Thwip. This went on for 20 minutes. We were paralyzed. We didn't have our phones, we had left them in the kitchen to be unplugged for the night. We were 200 yards from the safety of my back door, but that distance felt like a marathon across a minefield. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped at the front of the tent. I watched the zipper. The little metal tab, illuminated by the faint moonlight filtering through the fabric, began to wiggle. It moved down an inch. He was opening the tent. "Hold the zipper." I screamed at Mark. We both lunged forward, grabbing the bottom of the zipper track, pinching the fabric together with desperate strength. The zipper stopped moving, but we could see the depression in the canvas where a hand was gripping it from the outside. The hand pressed harder. We were in a tug-of-war with a stranger, separated only by a thin layer of nylon and mesh. Then, the pressure abruptly vanished. The hand let go. We waited, gasping for air, expecting him to slash the tent or kick it down. But he didn't. Instead, we heard the footsteps walking away. Not sneaking this time. Walking fast. Crunch, 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 fading into the deep woods, away from my house. We sat there for an hour, clutching the zipper, too terrified to move. Is he gone? Mark whispered eventually. I think so, I said. He went into the woods. We need to make a run for the house, Mark said. On 3. We unzip, we sprint. Don't look back. I nodded in the dark. Okay. 1, 2, 3. We ripped the zipper down and burst out of the tent, flashlights off to stay hidden, sprinting barefoot across the cold grass toward the amber glow of my porch light. We burst through the back door, locking it behind us and collapsing on the kitchen floor. My dad came running down the stairs with a baseball bat, woken up by our slamming of the door. We told him everything. He turned on the floodlights that illuminated the backyard and went out with his gun, scanning the tree line. He found nothing. No sign of anyone. He told us we probably spooked a drifter or a neighbor, and that we were safe inside. We spent the rest of the night in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every creak of the house settling. But the next morning, when the sun finally came up, my dad went back out to the tent to pack up our gear. He came back inside 5 minutes later, his face pale white. Boys, he said, his voice shaking. Come look at this. We walked out to the tent. The ashes of our fire were cold. The tent stood there, innocent and sagging in the morning dew. But then Dad pointed to the ground, right around the perimeter of the tent. My dad stood by the entrance of the tent, staring down at the mud. The morning sun was bright, birds were chirping, and everything looked normal, but the expression on his face was one of pure, unadulterated horror. What? I asked, stepping closer. What is it? Look, he whispered, pointing at the soft earth where the grass had worn away near the tent pegs. The ground was churned up. But they weren't boot prints. They were bare feet. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. The mud was trampled into a chaotic paste, showing that the person hadn't just walked around the tent once or twice. They had circled us for hours. The prints were layered over one another, a continuous, maddening loop of pacing. But that wasn't the part that made my blood run cold. When we followed the trail of the last set of footprints to see where they went, they didn't lead back into the deep woods like I had thought. They didn't disappear into the state forest. The footprints led away from the tent, crossed the 20 yards of lawn, and disappeared directly underneath the elevated wooden deck of our own house. The deck was raised about 4 feet off the ground, skirted with wooden lattice. It was dark and filled with old gardening tools and spiders. We had run right over that deck last night to get inside. Stay here, my dad ordered, his voice tight. He went into the garage and came back with a heavy-duty flashlight and his handgun. He didn't look like my dad in that moment, he looked like a stranger running on survival instinct. He walked to the side of the deck where a small access panel was latched shut. The latch was broken. It was hanging loosely by a single screw. Mark and I stood on the lawn, shivering in the morning light, watching as my dad kicked the panel open and shone the light into the darkness underneath our house. He didn't yell. He didn't shoot. He just froze. Call the sheriff, he said, without turning around. Now. When the deputies crawled out from under the deck 20 minutes later, they dragged out a filthy, stained mattress pad that had been stolen from our own garage. There were empty cans of food, wrappers, and a pile of cigarette butts. But the most disturbing thing was the collection of photos. Taped to the underside of the floorboards, directly beneath the living room where my family sat every evening to watch TV, were Polaroids. They were grainy and taken through the windows. Pictures of my mom cooking. Pictures of me doing homework. Pictures of us watching movies. The police determined that the man had been living under our deck for nearly a month. He wasn't a camper. He wasn't a hiker. He was a fugitive from a correctional facility 3 counties over, a man with a history of violent voyeurism. The walking away sound we heard that night. The fast crunching of leaves. He hadn't run into the woods. He had run back to his burrow. He was right beneath our feet when we burst into the kitchen, breathless and terrified. He was listening to us tell my dad about the man in the woods, probably laughing that wet, guttural laugh while clutching his knees in the dirt just inches below the floorboards. We moved 2 months later. I couldn't sleep in that house anymore. Every time the floor creaked, I didn't imagine the house settling. I imagined a hand pressing against the wood from below, waiting for the right moment to punch through. This happened about 5 years ago, back when I was a sophomore in high school. My parents had just gone through a messy divorce, so I was spending a lot of weekends at my friend Chris's house. Chris lived in one of those modern, sterile neighborhoods where every house looks exactly the same, big, boxy, and way too much glass. His parents were rich, the kind of rich where they traveled for business constantly and left their 15-year-old son with a loaded debit card and a stocked fridge. We loved it. We had the run of the place, the massive 4K TV, and the pool. It was a Saturday night in November. His parents were in Tokyo, so we were totally alone. We had done the usual stuff, ordered 3 pizzas, played FIFA until our eyes hurt, and chugged enough Mountain Dew to kill a small horse. Around 2 a.m., the sugar crash hit, but we weren't tired. We were in that weird, hyper-aware state you get into when you stay up too late. "Let's go on Omega Chat," Chris said, spinning around in his gaming chair. "Dude, no," I groaned from the beanbag. "It's just bots and old guys." "Come on, it's funny," he insisted. "We'll troll people. If it gets weird, we just skip." I sighed but agreed. Chris pulled up the site on his desktop computer. His setup was in the basement, which was a fully finished, man cave, with sliding glass doors that led out to the backyard pool area. It was pitch black outside, so the glass doors just acted like black mirrors, reflecting the blue light of the monitors. We started clicking through. Skip. 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 It was exactly what I expected. A guy playing guitar. A group of drunk college girls who yelled at us to take our shirts off. A guy in a horse mask. We were laughing, roasting people, having a good time. Then, we matched with a user named Null. There was no video. The screen was just black. No audio either. "Boring," Chris said, moving his mouse to click Next. Before he could click, text appeared in the chat box. "No, don't skip." Chris paused, his hand hovering over the mouse. "Okay, Mr. Mysterious," Chris muttered, typing back. "Turn on your camera or we skip. I can see you. That should be enough." We laughed. "Classic," I said. "He's probably a hacker script kiddie trying to scare us." "Oh yeah? What am I wearing?" "You're wearing a gray hoodie with a crumbling logo. Your friend has a red shirt. And you have a small stain on your left shoulder." The laughter died in my throat. I looked at Chris's shoulder. There was a small grease stain from the pepperoni pizza we'd eaten 3 hours ago. It was tiny. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it in HD. "Okay, that's weird," Chris said, his voice dropping an octave. "Maybe he hacked the webcam." Chris grabbed a sticky note and slapped it over the camera lens on top of his monitor. "Okay, genius. Can't see us now." We waited. The cursor on the screen blinked. Covering the webcam doesn't help when I'm not looking through the webcam. I felt a prickle of unease crawl up my spine. "Chris, disconnect. Let's just get off." "Wait," Chris said, his ego taking over. He typed furiously. "Stop trying to be edgy. You probably just IP tracked us and found our socials or something. I like the way you rearranged the furniture. The couch used to be against the back wall. It looks better in the center." Chris froze. He turned to me, his face pale. "My mom moved the couch last Tuesday. She didn't post that on Facebook. Nobody knows that except. He trailed off, looking around the basement. The room felt suddenly massive and exposed. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper. Why is it so dark down there? You should let some light in. Where are you? Closer than you think. I can prove it. Turn off the monitor. Don't do it, I said, standing up. Chris, seriously. Unplug the computer. I want to know who this is, Chris whispered. He was shaking, but he was fixated. He reached out and pressed the power button on the monitor. The screen went black. The room plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the faint standby lights of the modem and the console. See? Chris said, his voice trembling. Nothing happened. It's just a... The sound came from behind us. We both spun around. The sound was coming from the sliding glass doors that led to the backyard. I squinted into the gloom. The glass was reflective, showing only the vague outlines of the furniture and us. But then, my eyes adjusted. Pressed against the glass, on the outside, looking in, was a face. It was pale, almost glowing in the moonlight. It was pressed so hard against the glass that the nose and forehead were flattened, white and distorted. The eyes were wide, unblinking, staring directly at us. And in one hand, held up next to the face, was a cell phone. The screen was glowing, casting a blue light onto the stranger's features. He wasn't on the computer. He was on the chat site on his phone, watching us through the glass door while typing with his thumb. As we stared in paralyzed horror, the phone screen in his hand lit up with a notification. Inside the room, Chris's computer speakers dinged with the chat notification sound. No, found you. For a second that felt like an hour, nobody moved. The man outside stood frozen, his face a grotesque mask of pale skin pressed against the glass, the blue light of his phone illuminating a wide, unhinged grin that revealed too many teeth. Then, he slowly raised his other hand. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a rock the size of a grapefruit. Run, Chris whispered. The word barely left his lips before he screamed it. Run. We scrambled backward, tripping over the beanbag chairs and tangling our legs in controller cords. At the same moment, the man outside swung his arm back and smashed the rock into the sliding glass door. The safety glass didn't shatter immediately, it spiderwebbed into a million white fractures, holding its shape but turning opaque. We heard a guttural roar from outside, and then a second impact. The glass buckled. We didn't look back to see him enter. We sprinted for the basement stairs. I hit the first step on my hands and knees, clawing my way up, my fingernails digging into the carpet. Chris was right behind me, his breathing sounding like a panic attack in full swing. As we reached the top of the stairs and burst into the kitchen, we heard the sickening sound of the basement glass finally giving way, a cascade of shards hitting the laminate floor, followed by the crunch of heavy boots stepping onto the debris. Kitchen knife. Chris yelled, scrambling toward the island counter. No. I grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the foyer. Upstairs. The master bedroom has a lock. We can't fight him. We abandoned the kitchen and bolted up the main staircase. The house, usually so open and modern, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows. Every dark corner looked like a hiding spot. We threw ourselves into his parents' master bedroom and slammed the heavy oak door. Chris fumbled with the lock, his hands shaking so violently he couldn't get the latch to turn. Hurry, Chris, hurry. I hissed, listening for footsteps. Heavy, wet steps were coming up the main stairs. They weren't rushing. They were confident. The lock finally engaged. We backed away from the door, retreating into the massive walk-in closet. Chris pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen as he dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Someone's in the house. Chris cried, his voice cracking. He broke the glass. He's upstairs. We're in the master bedroom. I grabbed a golf club from his dad's bag in the corner of the closet and stood by the closet door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. We heard the footsteps reach the landing outside the bedroom. They stopped. Silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. The dispatcher was talking in Chris's ear, telling him to stay on the line, but I could barely hear her over the rushing of blood in my ears. Then, the bedroom doorknob rattled. It turned slowly, then stopped when it hit the lock. "Open up," a voice called out. It wasn't the deep, scary voice from the movies. It was normal. Calm. Almost friendly. "I just want to finish the chat." Chris muffled a sob with his hand. "Go away," I shouted, trying to sound dangerous. "The police are on their way. They're 2 minutes out." "Liar," the voice replied smoothly. "They're at least 10 minutes out. We're in the suburbs." Then came a sound that froze my blood. A heavy, rhythmic thud against the door. He was throwing his shoulder into it. The wood groaned. The frame creaked. "He's breaking it down." Chris screamed into the phone. "He's coming in." I raised the golf club, preparing to swing at the first thing that came through that door. I knew, with terrifying certainty, that we were about to die. But then, in the distance, growing louder by the second, we heard it. Sirens. Not one, but 3 distinct wails overlapping each other. They were close. The thumping on the door stopped instantly. There was a pause, and then the sound of rapid, heavy footsteps retreating down the hall. We heard the thudding on the stairs, fading fast, then the back door slamming shut. We didn't move. We stayed in that closet, huddled behind a rack of expensive suits, until the police physically kicked the bedroom door in and announced themselves. They didn't catch him. He had vanished into the network of drainage ditches and wooded lots behind the subdivision. The K-9 unit tracked his scent for 2 miles before losing it at a highway overpass. But the police found plenty of evidence. They found the rock. They found the muddy boot prints in the basement. And most terrifying of all, they found his station. In the backyard, hidden behind the pool pump equipment, they found a small folding chair and a solar charger. When the cybercrimes unit analyzed Chris's Wi-Fi router logs later that week, they found something that made my parents pull me out of that school and move us to a different state. The user, null, hadn't just found us that night. A device named unknown_user had been connected to Chris's Wi-Fi network every single night for the past 3 weeks. From 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. He had been sitting in the backyard, using their internet, watching us through the sliding glass doors while we played games, ate pizza, and slept. He had been watching us for nearly a month, just waiting for the night we were finally alone. The scariest part wasn't the chase. It wasn't the glass breaking. It was the fact that earlier that night, before we even went on the chat site, Chris and I had been swimming in the pool. It was dark. We were laughing and splashing around. And the police found a cigarette butt crushed into the dirt right next to the pool ladder. He had been sitting there, in the dark, less than 5 feet away from us, watching us swim. And we never saw him. I'm 20 years old now. I live in a 4th-floor apartment. I don't have sliding glass doors. I don't have a backyard. And every single device I own has a piece of thick, black electrical tape over the camera lens. Because the police never caught him. And sometimes, when I'm on my computer late at night, I get a notification from a random user. I never open it. I just unplug the machine and sit in the dark, listening to the silence, praying I don't hear the sound of a rock hitting glass.